Welcome back, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming back. Thanks a lot for all the comments on the last few videos that I've had. So great to get the welcome back that I've gotten. It's great to be shooting video again, and I'm glad I can share some stuff. So today, I thought I'd go over my Fast Tracks Turnout Jig. Now, there's a lot of videos that you can search on and find guys that have used these jigs to make the turnouts. And I'm going to just talk about some of the benefits of the Fast Tracks turnouts. Now, your initial buy-in on these kits, I haven't checked the prices in a while, and I probably should. When I bought my kit, probably 7-8 years ago at least, it was about $300. But the kit came with, and I would assume that they still do. I'll have to double check. But you get the jig itself, and it includes a left and a right turnout jig, obviously, on the same one. And then I got the stock. These are filing jigs, I guess. They call them stock aids. And then this one's the point form tool. Actually, I was experimenting with something, so that's why there's rail in here. But these are used to file the points and the frogs, and then this one is to form the stock rail where the diverging rail meets the stock rail, so it kind of creates that cavity. And we'll show you that in a minute. So if you go to the Fast Tracks website, the website has some videos to talk about all the reasons why these turnouts are great. They do take a little bit of time to make. I'm going to speed all of this up because you don't want to watch 45 minutes to an hour of me making these turnouts. It is a little bit time consuming. Like I said, you figure about 45 minutes to an hour. However, if you have the opportunity, and I'll show you after I'm done with this turnout how a truck rolls through. You can back a long string of freight up through them, you can pull through them, and the frogs are just, you don't get a bounce in between, just little things like that. The frog points, or the turnout points themselves, I make them continuous rails, so you don't get a dead point on the switch points at all. To me, one of the biggest advantages is the fact that you can make these turnouts any length you want. It's when you look at where they start to where they end, you don't have to go all the way from end to end. You can trim it here, you can trim it up here. And this is a number 6. I went with a number 6, which in HO is a little on the small side. But if you've got the room for a 5 or a 4, this number 6 is what I built the entire layout, including my yard with. And Microengineering just came out with those new switches for their yards and everything, where you can integrate the next switch into this piece of the previous switch and shorten up the total ladder length as you expand. And that's kind of what I did in the yard for mine. That's not something you could modify like a Payco or an Atlas turnout to do the same thing, or use Microengineering switches, but they're expensive. These, you just kind of integrate it in and make it how you want them to be. So if you've got room for a number 6, you could easily go with a number 8, let's say, and you wouldn't actually consume as much layout space. You'd still get that great flow of a number 8 or say a number 10, but use only the length of a number 6, but you still get that nice gradual transition. That's what I really like about these. With 6-axle units, longer cars on a number 6 diverging, these actually look a lot smoother, but not consume that much more room on the layout, which is important. The other thing, you guys know that I'm all about saving money. These turnout jigs are created with Microengineering rail in mind. I believe that when they model them and then when they carve them out or cut them out, they use Microengineering. However, I'm trying to keep a budget. So what I've found is that Atlas Code 100 rail, and actually I've even used Model Power because that's what I found. I've used, you know, older stuff. Any nickel silver rail I've found, I've tried, and it doesn't really alter the gauge of the track at all. And I've got a, you know, NMRA gauge, and it's it's just fine. So what I do is pick up used, or if I need to, I had to this most recent time. I went to my local hobby shop, and for, you know, whatever the cost of current flex track is, you just strip the rails out of them, and oh, this one might not come out as easy. You just strip the rail out, and there you go. You've got at least one leg. One 3-foot section of rail, if you cut it right, should give you 2 turnouts. So say $5 for one 3-foot section, depending on what you can find, or less, and you can make yourself 2 turnouts out of it. So honestly, I you know, trying to save a little bit of money here and there. I know the initial outlay for the turnout jig is expensive, but when you can start cutting costs on rails, it's actually not too bad. And the cost per turnout starts to go down. I made probably 40 some turnouts for this, and so I'm well under $10 per turnout on this layout. So well worth it if you can go this route. I highly recommend it. Let's flip over real quick, and I'll show you what other tools and pieces of equipment and other products you need to make these. Okay, as I said, so this is the Fast Track's turnout jig. It's got both left and right hand diverging. Then you've also got part of the kit. When I got it, is this actually really nice. It's just an Allen key that they cut out. This, you know, nice. Basically, it ends up being a T-handle, and you can use that to loosen these up. And so these are your point form tools, and these slide in and out. These are the point form tools. You can definitely get by without these, but it's a lot easier, and it helps with repetition, getting everything exact, because when you make the points in here, you want them to be very precise. Not needle precision, but pretty close. And the tighter you can make these pieces in here, the better you'll have your wheels roll across those. The other thing, Fast Track sells circuit board ties, so you can either use theirs. They are a .062 thickness, and that's what this is made for. When I actually thought I ran out of these, and so I had to buy more. It turns out I had a bag laying around, didn't realize it. I went on eBay and bought these off of eBay, and they are the same thickness, but they just came in sticks. And what I do like about these is that in terms of savings, I can measure out each of these pockets that you need and cut off as much as I need, and I feel like I waste a little less using these sticks, but they both get the job done. So of course you're going to need solder. Here again, if you can get a hold of it, I recommend lead solder because it is going to be more flexible. A rose compliant or a lead-free solder is going to have more tin. I find that to be more brittle, and that's going to be a little bit more unforgiving on the points themselves, and you'll see why as we get into it. Completely invaluable is, again, a rosin paste flux, and this will help you clean up the copper and the rails as you work. In this case, I have a nice electronics soldering iron, but in this case, sometimes a weller that isn't as temperature controlled is a little bit better, because there are some, when you're soldering the frogs together, you want a little bit more heat. This tip is a little bit big, so I actually use both this one and then my more electronics one. Both will work if you've got either one. X-Acto, I like to use just a razor saw, and you'll see why. You got to gap all the copper ties as you work along. A nice set of rail nippers. I've had these for a while, but they work great. This makes cut and track really well. The other thing you want is a Sharpie, and you'll see why in a second as to why we want that. So I think that's everything we need to get started. So let's get going. Okay, first things first. What I like to do, and this comes recommended by the Tim Waris, the guy who kind of created this whole Fast Tracks jig, is to make sure that you clean out. As you can see here, I've got some flux left over from the last one I made. You get some scrap in here. Like I said, I use this as a cutting platform a lot of times. So just with a wire brush, I come in, kind of knock out any particles that are in there, and just get it all cleaned up. And these things are really durable, so you're not going to hurt them too much. The next thing you're going to do is, again, I like to use these copper ties. So the steps you do to get these made is a little bit up to you. This is just how I do things. And so what I do first is so here's a piece that I used to have, see if it'll fit perfectly. So it's too short for those. So I'll go there, and with a pencil I'll just mark. Actually, I don't need this one because I'm not going to do a hinge, so we'll go with this one here, mark it roughly, and then I use my rail nippers for these. So according to the mark it, cut it, then pop it in. Now you just need to mark each one of these. I just put a dash on it with a pencil because you need to cut the copper so you don't short these two together. So once you have that cut, pop it back out, and then I use my razor saw and I just drag it across. And you'll kind of hear it once it starts to cut into the fiberglass of the tie, and then you kind of want to just visually inspect to make sure that you now have a gap in between the two, and then you just pop it back in. So now we're going to do that again for this one here. I'm going to skip the hinged one. That's what the H is for. And solid is the S. And that's what I personally like that, because that makes this entire piece of the turnout diverging and stock rail solid. And then, so put these in and these as well. So for this piece here, this is where your turnout, the points are going to connect to, and it's up to you if you want to make this piece this long. I never do, simply because I know that I'm using caboose turnouts, so all I'm going to use is the ends of one side or the other. So I actually trim this one considerably shorter, and then as I'm assembling it, I put a cut down the center. And all I do is center it here, and that way I've got enough room on either side to put the caboose turnout on either side, kind of thing. So I'd have plenty of room if I needed to. Okay, so we've got all of our PCB ties cut and gapped, and you'll notice here that on this one here I put a gap in between, so there's a gap here, and a gap in here. The frog itself is the rails are going to be cut here, so you need to isolate these two rails from these two rails. So that's why a gap here is important. And then the same thing on this side. The frog consumes this entire area, and then these rails have to be isolated from each other. So actually there's 3 gaps on this one because these two rails need to be isolated, these two rails need to be isolated, and then these two rails need to be isolated. So the next thing that I do, and I've got a bin of, or a little bucket of scrap, and in here is just some really short pieces, and you're probably wondering, well, what good are the short pieces? You need long pieces. But what you actually need to do is there's guardrails that go here and here. And to make those, there's actually, in the center of the jig here, this is the guardrail piece here. And so all you need to do is just take a piece of rail, and that's as long as you need it. Cut it, and then there's pieces here that are cut in on both sides, and all you have to do is take these, and then you can see it comes off at a slight angle, and so you just bend it until it's now perpendicular to the jig side itself, and then you do the same thing on this side, and then these will fit in to the guardrail like so. So you need two of those, and that's why these short pieces of rail are great. So what I'll do here, there's no filing on these, so I'll trim this end up, because that's the nippers do squish one end, so it's the only downside. So you just put those in. And then that goes in here. I usually put these off to the side. I put these in last, just because they just kind of get in the way for now. So we'll set those off to the side. The next thing I recommend is actually making the frog points. So that's here. I already started making this one, but so you bring, and this is where how long you make these is up to you. The longest you really need to make it is pretty much just past this copper tie here. Anything beyond that is up to you. So you could start the next switch as early as right here, and be right into your next turnout. And so that's what I like to do. In this case, I've got two scrap pieces here, so I'm just going to use them for demonstration purposes. I wouldn't normally make my turnouts this long. But here's where the marker comes in, the Sharpie. So I've already got this one started to file down, but I'm going to file that one down more. But what I do is I know that I need the inside of this rail, it needs to be cut. So I just mark it, and then that way I know when I put it into the tool, I know that this is the side that I am going to be shaving off. So what I'm going to do is, using the point form tool, you can see it's marked frog and points. So the frog goes in, I know there's the grooves here on this end, and I know that I need to cut this portion off, so I am going to stick it in like this. And basically you just want to stick this out as minimally as you can, just so the rail starts to stick out the top of the jig here a little bit, because really that's all you need to do is just shave this portion of it off. I'm really hoping that's showing up, but it's just minimal. The minimal amount right in here is really all you need. Once you've got it depth correctly, any Allen key or the one that they include, just tighten it down. My family's upstairs watching one of the Lord of the Rings films, just so you know. That's probably what you're hearing. So one of the primary tools that I completely forgot to say that we need is a good mill file. And you're going to be doing a lot of filing with these. You could use a Dremel, but it could prematurely wear this. So if you're going to use anything motorized, I'd almost suggest like a disc or belt, like a bench sander, that you can press the whole tool up against. These are hardened steel. They hold up really well. I mean, like I said, I've made 40 some turnouts with these, and they are showing a little bit of wear, but honestly, not much. The rail is much softer, so you don't need to worry about these the tool itself. But you want to evenly wear this entire tool so you don't get a divot in here, which will alter how the tool works and how this jig works. So now I'm basically just going to take a file and start filing this down. And I'm really going to speed this up because this can take a while depending on how sharp your file is, and it's really not exciting to watch. It's just me filing. So with good even strokes, I just like to hold it in my hand like this, and then you can see I've got a file that has grooves going kind of bidirectional, but I like to use the side that is only going one direction, and you start from the top of the jig or the tool, and you work your way down, and you'll feel it. It slides across and then bites into the rail. I usually work over a garbage can just so most of the filings go down into there, but kind of do what you need to do. I do not suggest you come back and go this way. As tempting as that might be, what you might do is catch the end of that and then just bend it up. So unfortunately, you just kind of keep doing it this way. Sometimes I'll just go straight down, but you want to just file all the way across. So you'll know you've got it at a good point. Sometimes when you look straight down the tool, you won't see a rise on the piece anymore, the rail that sticks through. The other thing, so you can kind of look, you can also see, be very careful if you run your finger along these. It can get razor sharp, or you get a burr, nice metal sliver in your finger. Does not feel well. So kind of check it, and you can't overdo these. Making these points is really critical to the function of these. So I recommend kind of going a little overboard and filing more than you think you need to. Once you're comfortable with where it is, though, you can remove it from the tool. And there you go. There's your one of the two that you need to make. Again, be very careful when you're running your fingers along. You don't want metal burrs. So we need to make two of these, so we'll make the other one. Okay, I apologize. I flipped the jig around, but mainly because it's going to be easier for me to work and hopefully get better results this way. All right, so now that we've got these, and you can kind of, as you make these, you'll learn. You can sometimes do all of the filing first and then assembly later. You can file, then come back, up to you. But in order to make your frog points, I would suggest removing at least this one and putting it off to the side, because we are going to actually bring these in. And what you want to do is you kind of want to seat both of them in their rails here, so you can see this one's got the beveled edge on this side, and then this one's the beveled edge on this side, and you want to bring them together and hopefully you look more coordinated than I do. Good Lord. Slide them together until they begin to touch. If they start to push each other open, then if one starts to go this way, that's too far, then you want to back them off. But that's where having really sharp points is important, because you want to try and get this pointed end as close to this end as you can. That reduces the gap that the wheel has to go across. So good sharp points on these, and getting them as far as you can without them pushing out either way is key. Okay, once the solder is cooled, you can lift the frog out, and you can see that it's in there nice. What I like to do is just take my file and kind of file the top of this smooth because this is where the rail is, or the wheels are going to be running. So you can see you get a nice flat surface on here. You can look and make sure you've got a nice sharp point on the end of it. So these are your frog rails. You can set these off to the side. We'll be coming back to these in a little bit. Okay, again, kind of up to you what you want to do next. If you go my route and you use the rails off of old Flux track, just kind of strip the ties off. I like to keep these ties around for when I need to fill in gaps in Flex track, and you just trim the molded in nails off and you've got some ties for later. I got a ton of those. So here I like to make the two stock rails, the diverging and the non-diverging, and what we're going to be doing here is, again with my Sharpie, I'm going to mark what section of rail I need to remove, and so that basically runs from, you can see there's a little notch in here where the switch points are going to be, to roughly in here. Ultimately you're just marking it so you know that this is the section of rail that you need to remove, so when you put it in the jig you have a good idea. And then the same thing with this one, and mark it accordingly. And now you're going to use the and each of these is coded per what code rail you're using. So this is code 100 stockade. So I'm going to take the straight rail, and then I will trim the end of this one off. So this one I have to feed in this way. And so now, if you can see, I don't know if it'll show up or not, but here's my Sharpie. So I'm going to bring the beginning of the Sharpie to this edge of the tool, like so, and then again with the Allen key, just lock it in place. Now how this filing is different is I'll hold it more like this, and you want to make a sharp definitive line on this side here, basically by doing this, and then you can gradually work it this way, and we're just trimming, we're shaving this away because this is where the points are going to nuzzle in to the stock rails. So again, a whole bunch of filing coming up. So I hold this one a little bit differently, but again, kind of just in my hand like this. And again, I'm going to make a more hard notch on this side, so you can focus on it like this to start with, but ultimately you're going to be taking the file and running it across this way. So once you've got the two stock rails carved out, this one you know is good, doesn't need to be, the straight rail, non-diverging route doesn't need to be trimmed at all, or I'm sorry, bent at all. But what you can do with the diverging route is actually pre-form it a little bit, and to do that you can just kind of run it through your fingers. Again, be careful when you run your fingers through this section, as one, it flexes a lot easier because the webbing is gone. That's basically all we did there, was remove the webbing of the rail. But if you run it through like this, you'll kind of give it a little bit of a pre-form, and that kind of helps when you lay it into the jig itself. It won't have as much of a tendency to want to hop out, at least in hopes. Okay, so I've got this marked side, much like, and then I'm using the point form tool. In this case, instead of using frog, I'm using the point. So I will feed the blackened side in to this side so it sticks out. And again, bring it out just enough that the top of the rail head sticks out, because you do want to get these to a nice fine point, and then snug it down. And a whole lot of filing. Okay, so are you tired of filing yet? Well, the good news is that we yeah, actually we're almost, I think we're pretty much done with the filing. You can't make these points too sharp. This is really another facet of a Fast Track's turnout that makes them function a lot better than your, off-the-shelf pre-made turnouts. How sharp you make this is how well it snugs into the stock rail, and how easy the flanges of the wheels will go on the route that you want it to. So you want to make these as really as fine as you can. So the next step is to take these, and again, much like we did on the stock rail, is to take these and kind of flex it just a little bit. Again, be careful in this area, one, for slivers, but two, also it's a lot more flexible because it's missing most of the rail. But just give it a little bit of a pre-curve, pre-stress it a little bit. Sometimes you can just flex it. You just want to kind of try and get it to follow the curvature of the rail. And there's a little pocket that it sits in over on this end here. That's where you want the end of the point to be. So you just snug it up in there, and the rest of it sits in here. But you're basically looking to get the rail in like that. Make sure that it's sitting in the pocket on this end. And then on the jig, there are two marks cut in here, and you just want to mark the top of the rail where that is. And the reason for that is we're going to take this, and now on this outside web, so I've just flipped the rail around, I'm going to take my nippers and I'm going to put just a triangular shaped, in the web of the rail, a little notch. And what that'll allow me to do then is to take it and bend it like that, and this webbing won't get in the way, and I'll get a nice bend right in there. And the reason for that is because that becomes the guardrail on this side right in here. So you can see now when I seat this rail in, it's now diverged off and become this guardrail here. So I'm going to mark it again roughly where it needs to be cut. And here's, if for those of you who haven't used nippers before, the crushing edge is on the inside, the flush cut edge is on the outside. So in this case I want to make sure that my flush cut is on that side. So here's one of those scrap pieces of rail that I'll save for another turnout to make the guardrails, or even really short points. You can see that even honestly this piece would be good for a point, and it'd just be a really short turnout, which is perfect. So off to the side with that. But now we can fit this in, and again, this is kind of where you can see where preforming these helps a little bit. Fast Tracks actually does make a bending tool, which I'd love to get, but unfortunately I've made enough of these and I just roll them with my fingers. Okay. So all the metal fabrication, so to speak, is done. Now it's time to start soldering the rails to the PCB ties. And again, this is where your flux is going to come in handy. Even if you've got brand new rail, it can have contaminants on it from handling, from your fingers. The copper itself can be contaminated, again, handling, whatnot. Always good to clean it up, gives you good flow. So it's just liberal amounts. You clean this up later, so I just kind of get a little bit on the rail itself. You're not soldering on the throw bar, so don't apply any there. And sometimes, even if you're new to this, don't even have this in here, so you don't solder it to the stock rails. This is for the turnout rails only. This one here is on the outside only because your turnout rails will be here, and so you don't want solder on the insides, and that prevents the turnout bars from throwing and completely snugging up. Nothing there. This one here, we're on the inside and outside. On the inside and outside of this first one only. On the outside of this next one, because we'll be coming back later and putting in the guardrails here and here, so don't put any on the inside of this second, and same with this one. And then these last two inside and outside, no problem. Okay. Depending on if you have one or not, sometimes this is just a solder tool that you can use to help hold things down because the rail will conduct heat pretty well. So what I like to do, you try and minimize how much solder you're going to be putting on here. It just looks better, and solder is actually a little bit stronger than you might think, so you don't need a ton of it, but heat up the joint, apply a little bit of solder to it. That's kind of all you need. Sorry, turning the jig around here again on you guys. I like to do both ends, which helps to lock the rails into place. Remember, outside only on these here. On these here, you want to make sure that this rail is pushed as far out as you can so it's snug up against this wall of the jig. That'll allow your diverging rail to snug in here really well. Alright, so the next step is then to take your diverging rail here and snug it up in its pocket here. Sometimes you have to, for this guardrail piece, sometimes you gotta bend it a little bit more to get it to fit. Kind of get it close and figure it out. Okay, applying flux on these. You apply flux here, 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 and here. Here's the only one on this solid, on the S, is on both sides. These two, these three are on this side only. You can apply solder in between here and here as long as you have made your cut in between these here, which I did. This isn't necessity, but it can add a little extra strength. So now we come back with our points, and here's where you can see how a good sharp point snugs right in there. And so these we are going to flux on the outsides on all of these, and then on the inside and in between here. We'll solder these down a little bit more once we've got the turnout out of the jig, and I'll show you how we do that in a second. Okay, now back to those first two guardrails. There we go. And those will now slip in. And again, these might take a little bit of tweaking and bending to get to fit. Sometimes they fit in one side or the other a little bit better. Alright, that is the majority of soldering done. You can see here, this is why I don't usually make my frog points as long as I do, because now I either trim these, which is a waste of rail, or, you know, I mean, honestly, I would make these pretty much end right here. Keep these turnouts nice and short. So before we pop this out of the rail, or out of the jig rather, you can attach one side of the diverging routes. And what I like to do is use, most likely either one is fine, so kind of up to you. You don't want to overdo this because you do not want to solder, you don't want the solder to flow too much and then solder this rail to this stock rail. And now here you're thinking, well, these are going to flex and I should put more solder on. In actuality, if you're using a lead-based solder, it's pretty flexible unto itself, so you don't need to. I mean, if you've ever worked with lead weights, you know how flexible lead is. So in actuality, that you don't need to do that. So sometimes this can be the hardest part is popping it out once everything is in. But that's it. That's soldering this entire thing up. So there's a few more solder steps. Alright, there we go. That is your turnout now removed from the jig. But before we finish, so we have to, so you can see here we've got one side of our switch points is now connected. The way to do the other side is, if you have a PCB tie or a tie of any kind, is bring it in and the gap is up to you. Some of the earliest ones I made, I had the really most fine gap that I could get. In reality, that ended up just causing problems with older freight cars that had larger flanges on them. Just led to derailments, and I ended up coming back and gapping these a little bit wider. If you're using newer, you know, more metal wheel sets and stuff like that, you can probably get away with a smaller gap. I err on the side of caution. I'd rather, it doesn't look as prototypical, but I'm looking more for functionality here. Alright, so then now we're just going to solder this side on. You want to make sure that when you do that, that you don't, the solder doesn't go underneath and start to fill it on this side, on the inside, because then you won't get a good joint in between, and then on that side. So then one other thing, you can do this is completely optional, but we have to put cuts into these rails. So sometimes to strengthen up these frog points is I will come in and put solder here and here to try and bridge these gaps. Again, not a necessity, but sometimes it can help a little bit. So try and just kind of flux across these. And you'll see, but that helps once this is, it just, ow, that's still hot. This helps strengthen this whole thing up. So Almost done, but we have one last thing to do. You can use a jeweler saw, a razor cutoff. If you've got a razor saw like this, you could probably get in there. But ever since I've started doing these, I just use a fine-toothed jeweler saw, and I'll put this in the vise, and I'll show you where we need to make cuts. But the reason that there's two copper PCB ties here is because we're going to put cuts here and here on both rails, and then here and here on both rails, and then that isolates the frog as one piece. And this whole thing is isolated as one piece. It's one solid piece, which is why on the layout I have you either use a frog juicer to change the polarity, or like in my case you use toggle switches to flip between. Now the downside of that obviously is that I've got to flip the switch every time I switch a turnout. Not too big a deal, but these frogs are powered, so you've got power through the frog, power to the next rail, which is great. You don't get any stuttering as it goes through here. So let's put this in the vise, and I'll show you what we need to do. So again, just a jeweler saw with a nice fine blade on it, and what you have to do is loosen up the top, back it off a little, and then feed this through. Bring it up, clamp it in on that end, put some tension on it, not a ton, but enough, clamp it down. And if you're using a saw like this, I highly suggest that you use some draw strokes first, and until you get it started, lift up, draw back, once you get to the end of the webbing, you might need to start just doing draw strokes again. There we go, broke through, and then we got to go through the next rail. Again, draw strokes to start it, kind of try and hit the same. There we go. Okay, so one of the last things that you want to do is, once you've got everything cut, is you want to come back, and before the switch is installed, is clean it off. Just a little bit of soapy water and a toothbrush to get some of this flux. The flux can be difficult to paint, so if you want to spray paint these or anything like that, the flux can cause problems. Okay, final step. After you've cleaned it all off, after you've gotten the cuts in to isolate everything, before you install it, I can't stress this enough, do this before you install it on the layout, or it becomes a nightmare. Don't ask me how I know that, but finding a short on your homemade turnout can be a nightmare. So move your template off to the side, using an ohm meter, set to, if it's got the, you can either use it, some of them have a beep for continuity. Mine I just set to measure resistance, and if you have a 0 ohm, if it comes up 0, that means you have a short. If it stays on 1 like it is here, you have no short. So I'll see if I can keep this in frame. I don't know if I'm going to be able to or not. You can see the numbers there. But now basically I would just need to make sure that rails are not, so no shorts there, no shorts there. I want to make sure that my frog is isolated from the stock rails, which it is. Frog is isolated from the stock rails, which it is. That isn't supposed to be. That's isolated. Aha. Okay, so I have a short here. So I guess this is good. I can demonstrate. So what you can do, so I know that if you can see it here, just so it shows up, there is a short between this rail and this rail. So that could most likely be this tie here. And sometimes what you'll get is copper, when these are sheared, when they cut them, copper will go over the side. So what I'll do is just take a file, and in this cut area, just file it a little bit in case there's any copper on the side, and that should help break it. So let's see if that did it or not. And it did. So seriously, this is really a critical step in making these turnouts, because if you do this later, you have to take the whole layout into consideration. Where is the short? Is it one of these? You know, it just, trust me, it's not a good thing. All right, so the final thing, the whole reason we're doing this, and the whole reason these Fast Tracks turnouts are worth the time and the effort, is the truck test. So if you take, and this is just a lousy plastic truck, but you run them through here, and this actually could be filed a little bit just to smooth this out. There's some solder on the tops of the rails, but these are just, they're just smooth through here, and it can, you know, you just, there's no bump as it rolls through here. There's no bump because as if you watch the Fast Tracks stuff on their website, basically the point hands it off to the stock rail, the guardrail there, and you can see there's just, it doesn't drop down. It just, it's like, it functions more like a prototypical turnout in that regards, that it hands it off and it's just smooth through there. And same thing here. I'm getting a little bit of a bump, but I think that's because there's solder there. But it's just smooth all the way through, and that's just, you know, why you spend all this time on these ultimately. And then the great thing too is that if we look at your points here, you can see how much filing is important, but you can see how they snug up into there, and it snugs up into this pocket right in here. So that's the bump on your turnout on either rail, and that's just, you know, no flange is going to catch that. That's just going to go right through, and you're going to get a nice diverging route, or you're going to get a nice, you know, straight route. It doesn't flex as much as you might think, but I do the solid, which normally a hinged turnout, you would have to put hinges in here. Actually, I think it's back in here. But I like the look of this. To me, it functions more like a real turnout, because you got these long switch points, and I just like the looks of them. And you can see it doesn't flex that much, so you don't really have to worry about resoldering these. So final steps for these is up to you. You know, you can, you know, apply them to the layout, and then, or put ties down and then apply them, these on the layout. You can apply ties to them and then put the whole thing in as a finished product. You can lay ties down and then lay these over the top, securing the copper ties to hold the turnout in place. Up to you. I've done both. Personally, I like putting the ties in on the layout and then putting these in place. Well, there you go. That's a Fast Tracks turnout. And like I said, I would normally trim these off and make this, you know, quite a bit shorter, and then that way. So this is a number 6 turnout, and I've used these throughout the layout. They're great because you get a little bit more prototypical diverging route. You don't have this sharp, you know, 18-degree radius, you know, or 18-inch radius diverging route. A little bit of extra work, a little bit of extra upfront cost. In my opinion, just so well worth it. These function so well, and actually this is probably one of the best ones I've ever made. And now I'm disappointed because I really don't have any place to put it on the layout. If you guys aren't interested in taking the dive and making or purchasing the kit, you don't feel like you would get the best use out of it. I mean, $300 is what it was. Again, I'd have to look and see what it is currently. It isn't for everybody. If you're not going to be making a lot of these, you won't get the return on investment, if you will, and the cost per turnout down low enough where it makes it kind of worthwhile. Their quality is well worth it, but if you're only going to be making 5 of them, $60 a turnout, if my math is correct, you might as well buy a Pecos or, you know, Micro Engineering. But if you're making enough of these, it's well worth it. However, if you are interested in Fast Track's turnouts, don't want to buy the jig, contact me and we can discuss. I can possibly make some of these. I don't have a ton of time, but it's something that I could look at doing, you know, making a handful of them for you if that would help out. If you want me to make you a few of them just so you can test them out and see if there's something you want, I can definitely do that as well. So feel free to ping me on that, message me on YouTube or whatever, and we can discuss. So thanks a lot, everybody. I hope that was helpful. I hope you got an idea of what the Fast Track's jigs are. The switches are, the turnouts are well worth it. In a future video, I'll go into how to install them on the layout once I find a place for this one, maybe, or maybe I'll make a diorama just to show you what it does and how it looks installed. So thanks a lot. Thanks for coming back to the channel, and we'll see you next time.